Hey there, history fans! Welcome back to another thrilling journey through the annals of time. Today, we're diving into one of the most significant events in human history, the French Revolution. This was a period that not only transformed France but also sent shockwaves across the globe, influencing countless other nations and shaping the modern world as we know it. Imagine France in the late 1700s. Picture the bustling streets of Paris, the grandeur of the royal court, and the stark contrast between the opulence of the aristocracy and the dire poverty of the common people. The year is 1789, a year that would mark the beginning of a dramatic and tumultuous period in French history. The once great nation is teetering on the brink of chaos. Political corruption, economic hardship, and social inequality have pushed the people to their breaking point. King Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette, rule from their lavish palace in Versailles, oblivious to the growing discontent among the people. Their extravagant lifestyle and disconnect from the common folk only fuel the flames of revolution. France is a powder keg of frustration, and the fuse is about to be lit. The common people, burdened by heavy taxes and food shortages, are ready to rise up against the oppressive regime. The French Revolution was a period of radical social and political upheaval that shook France to its core. It began with the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, a symbolic act of defiance against the tyranny of the monarchy. It was a time of great hope, but also of immense violence and bloodshed. The revolutionaries sought to overthrow the old order and establish a new society based on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore the causes of this momentous event, from the financial crisis that crippled the nation to the Enlightenment ideas that inspired the revolutionaries. We'll delve into its key moments, such as the Reign of Terror, the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, and the eventual establishment of the French Republic, and we'll examine its lasting impact on France and the world. The French Revolution not only changed the course of French history but also inspired other revolutionary movements and laid the groundwork for modern democracies. Buckle up, because we're about to embark on a wild ride through history. From the storming of the Bastille to the rise of Napoleon, this is a story of courage, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. So, let's get started and uncover the incredible saga of the French Revolution. To understand the French Revolution, we need to delve into the deep-seated social inequalities that plagued French society for centuries. These inequalities were not just economic but also social and political, creating a complex web of discontent that eventually led to one of the most significant upheavals in history. France was divided into three distinct estates, each with its own set of privileges and burdens. This division was not just a matter of social class but was deeply entrenched in the very fabric of French society, influencing every aspect of life from birth to death. At the top of this hierarchy sat the First Estate, made up of the clergy. The clergy enjoyed vast wealth and privileges, including exemption from taxes. They owned about 10% of the land in France and collected tithes from the common people, further increasing their wealth. Their influence extended beyond the spiritual realm as they played a significant role in the political and social spheres of the time. Next came the Second Estate, the nobility. The nobles lived lives of luxury and opulence, often in grand chateaux and estates. They were also exempt from most taxes and held significant political power. The nobility was divided into two groups: the nobles of the sword, who were traditional aristocrats, and the nobles of the robe, who had bought their titles. Both groups, however, were united in their desire to maintain their privileges and status. Then there was the Third Estate, which comprised everyone else. This included peasants, who made up the vast majority of the population, as well as artisans, merchants, and the burgeoning middle class, known as the bourgeoisie. The Third Estate was incredibly diverse, ranging from wealthy merchants to impoverished peasants, but they all shared one thing in common: they bore the brunt of taxation and had little to no political power. The Third Estate was responsible for paying the majority of the taxes, including the taille, a direct land tax, and the gabelle, a tax on salt. These taxes were often crushing and left many peasants in a state of perpetual poverty. Despite their significant contributions to the economy, members of the Third Estate had little say in government and were often subject to the whims of the nobility and clergy. This rigid social hierarchy bred deep resentment and frustration among the lower classes. They saw the privileged few living off their labor, enjoying lives of luxury while they struggled to survive. The sense of injustice was palpable and grew stronger with each passing year. The Enlightenment ideas of equality and individual rights began to take root among the educated members of the Third Estate, further fueling their discontent. As the 18th century wore on, the gap between the haves and the have-nots widened. The wealth disparity became more pronounced, with the rich becoming richer and the poor becoming poorer. This created a breeding ground for revolution, as the lower classes began to demand change. The financial crisis of the late 1780s, exacerbated by France's involvement in costly wars and the lavish spending of the monarchy, only added fuel to the fire. The stage was set for a dramatic and violent upheaval that would change the course of history forever. Social inequality wasn't the only problem plaguing France. The country was also in the throes of an economic crisis. Decades of extravagant spending by the monarchy, coupled with costly wars and inefficient tax collection, had left France deeply in debt. The situation was exacerbated by a series of bad harvests, which led to food shortages and skyrocketing prices. The common people, already struggling to make ends meet, were pushed to the brink of starvation. As the economy spiraled downward, so too did the popularity of King Louis XVI, who seemed indifferent to the plight of his people. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between the monarchy and the masses. While social and economic factors created a fertile ground for revolution, the discontent among the lower and middle classes was palpable. The stark contrast between the opulence of the aristocracy and the struggles of the common people was becoming increasingly intolerable. The heavy taxation, food shortages, and rising bread prices only added fuel to the fire of discontent. However, it was the ideas of the Enlightenment that provided the spark that ignited the revolutionary fervor. The Enlightenment was not just a period of intellectual exploration, it was a time when the very foundations of society were being questioned and reimagined. The Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophical movement that swept through Europe in the 18th century, challenging traditional norms and advocating for a society based on reason, science, and respect for humanity. It was a time when thinkers began to question the established order and propose new ways of organizing society. Emphasizing reason, individual liberty, and popular sovereignty, Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu played pivotal roles in shaping revolutionary thought. Locke's theories on natural rights and government by consent, Rousseau's ideas on social contract and general will, and Montesquieu's advocacy for the separation of powers were revolutionary in their implications. These thinkers challenged the absolute authority of monarchs, questioning the divine right of kings, and proposing that power should be derived from the people. They argued that a government's legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed, not from hereditary privilege or divine sanction. Their arguments were not just theoretical, they were calls to action. They inspired people to think critically about their own societies and to demand changes that would reflect the principles of justice, equality, and liberty. The idea that governments should be based on the consent of the governed resonated deeply with those who felt oppressed and disenfranchised. These revolutionary ideas resonated deeply with the French people, particularly those who were most affected by the inequalities of the time. The common people, who bore the brunt of heavy taxation and economic hardship, found hope in the promise of a more just society. The educated middle class, or the bourgeoisie, were particularly influenced by Enlightenment ideas. They were well-read and engaged in intellectual discussions, and they began to see themselves as deserving of a greater say in their own governance. They were inspired by the notion that they could shape their own destinies and create a society that reflected their values and aspirations. Civic meetings and community discussions became hotbeds of revolutionary thought. People gathered to debate and discuss the ideas of the Enlightenment, and these gatherings became incubators for the revolutionary movement. The desire for a government that represented the will of the people grew stronger with each passing day. The writings of the philosophes, as Enlightenment thinkers were known, became rallying cries for change. Their works were widely read and discussed, and they provided a blueprint for a new kind of society. The philosophes' emphasis on reason, science, and human rights inspired people to envision a world where justice and equality were not just ideals, but realities. Public speeches and rallies became common as people began to demand change. Enlightenment pamphlets and books were circulated widely, spreading revolutionary ideas far and wide. The call for a more just and equitable society was no longer just a whisper, it was a roar that could not be ignored. Inspired by the Enlightenment, the French people began to demand their rights and justice. Protests and demonstrations became more frequent, and the call for revolution grew louder. The ideas of the Enlightenment had fanned the flames of revolution, and there was no turning back. The desire for a society based on reason, equality, and liberty had taken hold, and it would change the course of history forever.